Zoe Franklin stopped in the middle of the Walsh construction parking lot and took a deep breath, trying to etch this moment into her memory. Louisville stretched before her like an infinite horizon of possibilities, with the Ohio River shimmering in the morning sun like molten gold. 27 years old, a degree earned through sleepless nights, and her mother's voice echoing in her head saying that education was the only inheritance that mattered. She was about to enter the most imposing glass building she had ever seen, when she noticed a man in a dark suit struggling with a briefcase spilling papers across the pavement. Without thinking twice, Zoe ran to him and bent down to help, gathering the sheets flying in the wind. The man didn't even thank her. He just looked her up and down with that expression Zoe knew so well, the same one she saw on her father's boss's faces when he came home covered in cement dust. Contempt disguised as indifference. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice so cold it could freeze the Kentucky sun itself. "Reception is over there, miss. Find your place before meddling where you don't belong." Zoe felt her face burn, but not with shame. It was pure anger. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her knee and extending the papers with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks for your kindness, but I know exactly where my place is. By the way, could you tell me where the trainee office is? Or don't drivers have that information?" The man raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the sharp response. For a second, Zoe thought she saw a flash of something like amusement in those dark eyes, but he simply turned his back and entered the building without looking back. Zoe stood there, holding her visitor badge like it was a passport to another world, which, in a way, it was. She had grown up watching her father come home with calloused hands and wounded pride, always talking about the suits who ran construction sites without ever getting their boots dirty. And now here she was, about to enter that universe through the front door. Or at least trying to, after having just insulted what was apparently some executive's personal driver. Only later, when Zoe finally reached reception and saw the giant photo on the entrance wall, did her stomach drop. The arrogant man from the parking lot wasn't a driver at all. It was Henry Walsh, owner of the empire, and she had just called him a driver on her first day of work. "Heaven help me," Zoe muttered to herself, while the receptionist, an elegant woman with perfectly manicured nails, looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "First time here?" the woman asked, with a sympathetic smile probably reserved only for naive trainees. "Is it that obvious? Honey, you have the look of someone who just met the boss, and apparently it wasn't the best first impression." The receptionist leaned in, lowering her voice as if revealing a state secret. "Let me give you a tip. Henry Walsh never forgets a face, and he definitely doesn't forget an insult. But look on the bright side, at least you'll be memorable." "Great," Zoe grumbled. "I always wanted to be remembered as the idiot who mistook the billionaire for the driver." "Hey, relax. Last year a trainee mistook him for the water delivery guy and asked him to change the water cooler jug. The kid didn't last 3 days. The receptionist winked. "You're already doing better." Zoe wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. The first week was a silent nightmare. Zoe dove into projects with almost desperate determination, trying to prove she deserved to be there. But the initial humiliation seemed to have taken root. Every time she crossed paths with Henry in the hallways, he completely ignored her, as if she were invisible, which in a way was worse than being reprimanded. At least a scolding meant he cared enough to acknowledge her existence. Worse still were the curious looks from other employees who had already heard about the disastrous parking lot encounter. Gossip ran wild, and Zoe knew she was being judged not by her work, but by her audacity in responding to the great Henry Walsh. Maya, the only other trainee who had been friendly with Zoe, appeared at her desk on Thursday with 2 coffees and a conspiratorial expression. "So, is it true you called Walsh a driver? News travels fast, doesn't it?" Zoe sighed, accepting the coffee like a lifeline. "Girl, this is better than a soap opera. Everyone's divided between thinking you're brave or completely insane." Maya sat on the edge of the desk, lowering her voice. You know what I think? I think you knocked him out of his comfort zone. Henry Walsh is used to people fawning over his Italian shoes. You went there and basically told him to find his own place. That's legendary, or professional suicide, Zoe murmured. Minor detail, Maya agreed cheerfully. But look, you're still here. That's got to count for something. What Zoe didn't know was that at that exact moment, Henry was in his office on the top floor, looking out the window with a glass of whiskey he wasn't even drinking, thinking about exactly the same thing. He hadn't fired the insolent trainee. Worse, he couldn't stop thinking about her, about that defiant look, about that stupid courage to respond to someone who could end her career with one word. It was irritating. It was intriguing. And Henry Walsh hated being intrigued. Winston, his bulldog, snored at his feet, completely oblivious to his owner's existential drama. It was the following Sunday that fate decided to play its cards again. Zoe was at Waterfront Park, sitting on a bench facing the Ohio River, trying to find some peace in a view she never tired of admiring. Louisville had this gift of mixing beauty and chaos in a way that made her heart beat faster. She was so distracted by the movement of boats on the water that she didn't notice when someone sat down next to her. Beautiful view, isn't it? The voice was familiar but different, softer, almost human. Zoe turned her head and almost choked. Henry Walsh was there, in shorts and a t-shirt, without the impeccable suit he wore like armor. He had a book in his hand and a dog beside him, a fat bulldog that looked at her with the same bored expression as its owner. For a moment, Zoe thought about getting up and leaving, but something in his posture made her hesitate. He looked tired, almost vulnerable, as if this were a secret refuge no one knew about. Yeah, she replied, deciding to pretend not to recognize him. After all, if he could ignore her at work, she could do the same outside of it. Sometimes we need to remember there's life beyond glass buildings. Henry smiled crookedly, and Zoe noticed it was a different smile than she had imagined. There was something genuine there, hidden under layers of cynicism. You're not from here, are you? He asked, and this time there was no judgment in his voice, just curiosity. Bowling Green, Zoe replied, still looking at the river. But Louisville always seemed bigger than just a city to me. It feels like a feeling, you know, like the horizon promises you can be more than people told you you could be. He was silent for a moment, and Zoe had the impression she had said something that caught him off guard. When she finally looked at him, Henry was watching her with an intensity that made something strange happen in her chest, as if, for the first time, someone was really seeing her. Not the poor trainee, not the girl from the countryside, but Zoe, just Zoe. You're right, he said quietly, almost as if talking to himself. Sometimes we forget that horizons exist to be reached, not just admired. The dog let out a loud snore, breaking the moment. Zoe laughed, and Henry rolled his eyes with a mix of exasperation and affection. This is Winston. He hates everyone. I imagine you two get along well then, Zoe blurted out before thinking, and immediately regretted it. But instead of being offended, Henry laughed, a real, genuine laugh that completely transformed his face. Taché, he murmured, and Zoe realized that perhaps, just perhaps, that arrogant parking lot man was more complex than he seemed. Winston chose that moment to get up, walk over to Zoe, and deposit his heavy head in her lap, leaving drool on her jeans. Zoe grimaced, but automatically started scratching the dog's ears. This is unprecedented, Henry commented, genuinely surprised. Winston only likes me, the housekeeper who feeds him, and absolutely no one else, he once growled at the mayor. Maybe he has good taste, Zoe replied, then widened her eyes. In choosing people, I mean, not that the mayor is bad or... Heavens, I'm going to stop talking now. Henry laughed again, and Zoe realized she liked that sound. It was unexpected, like finding a musical note in the middle of a technical report. They stayed talking until the sun began to set, about books, about Louisville, about dreams that sometimes seemed too big to fit in one life. Henry discovered that Zoe had read T.S. Eliot and could quote passages from memory. Zoe discovered that Henry played piano and had a secret collection of jazz vinyls that no one in the family knew existed. "Let me guess," Zoe said at one point. "Modern jazz? Pretentious classical music?" "Miles Davis," Henry admitted, looking almost embarrassed. "Coltrane, Bill Evans. My grandmother used to play them when I was a kid. She said anyone who couldn't appreciate jazz had no soul." "Your grandmother was right." Zoe smiled. "My dad sang Take 5 in the shower, completely off-key, but with feeling." Henry didn't ask where she worked, and Zoe didn't mention it. For those 2 hours, they were just two strangers sharing a park bench, a grumpy dog, and the rare feeling of being understood. When they finally said goodbye, Henry hesitated for a second before saying, "It was good talking to someone who doesn't treat me like I'm made of money and arrogance." Zoe smiled, picking up her bag. "It was good talking to someone who forgot to be insufferable for a few hours." She walked away without looking back, but felt the weight of his gaze until she disappeared down the path. What Zoe didn't know was that Henry Walsh had recognized her from the first second, and for the first time in years he didn't know whether to regret or rejoice at having let his guard down. On the following Monday, everything changed. Zoe was called to the projects department for a meeting with the new supervisor. When she entered the glass conference room and saw Henry sitting at the head of the table, the world seemed to stop. Their eyes met, and for an instant the surprise was mutual and devastating. He knew, of course he knew, and she had been foolish enough to believe that moment in the park was real. His smile disappeared, replaced by the cold, professional mask Zoe already knew so well. And when he opened his mouth to begin the meeting, treating her with the same icy indifference as before, Zoe understood she had made the classic mistake of confusing kindness with interest. Henry Walsh wasn't a man who became enchanted. He was a man who collected moments and then discarded them, like everything else in his life. If Zoe thought the meeting would be awkward, she wasn't even close to imagining the private hell the next few months would become. Henry Walsh didn't just ignore the park encounter. He treated her with a professional coldness that bordered on elegant sadism. Every presentation she made was dissected with sharp comments. Every project received "AI could be better said" in that tone of voice that made Zoe want to throw her folder in his face. But the worst part wasn't the criticism. The worst were the moments when she caught him looking at her when he thought no one was watching, with an expression she couldn't decipher, as if he were waging an internal war and she was the battlefield. The weeks dragged on in a cruel routine of poorly disguised tension. Zoe arrived early, left late, determined to prove she deserved to be there. But Louisville conspired against her sanity. The city insisted on putting them on the same path, as if it were a bored goddess deciding to play Cupid with two stubborn mortals. She found him at the Louisville artisan market when she went to buy a gift for her mother. Henry was negotiating with a local craftsman about the price of a wooden sculpture, and for the first time, Zoe saw a side of him she didn't know. He laughed, bargained with authentic Kentucky humor, talked about the grandfather who had taught him to respect people who worked with their hands. He even praised the craftsman's work with technical knowledge that surprised even the seller. "Was your grandfather a carpenter?" the craftsman asked, clearly impressed that a man in an expensive suit knew the difference between walnut and oak. "He was an engineer," Henry replied, and there was something sweet in his voice. But he said engineering was just carpentry with more complicated math. Zoe was so absorbed watching this different version of Henry that she didn't notice when he finally saw her. When their eyes met, it was like an electric shock. For a second, Henry looked like he was going to smile, but then the mask returned with full force. He paid for the sculpture, took the package and walked past her without a word, leaving only the trail of expensive cologne and the feeling that she had seen something she shouldn't have. The craftsman looked at Zoe with a knowing expression. "That boy is suffering," he said simply. "I know that look. My son had the same one when he fell in love with the wrong woman. Or the right woman at the wrong time, who knows?" He's not suffering, Zoe murmured, more to herself than to the craftsman. He's just being himself. Miss, he'll give you advice you didn't ask for. A man who looks at a woman that way is either in love or has digestive problems, and that one didn't seem to have a stomachache. Zoe bought a woven basket for her mother and left the market laughing to herself, because if she didn't laugh, she would cry, and she had already cried enough because of Henry Walsh. The second encounter was even worse. Zoe was at the bell of Louisville Overlook, simply contemplating the view, when Henry appeared beside her like a ghost in a suit. This time, he didn't run. "You have a special talent for appearing in the wrong places," he said, but there was something different in his voice, almost a tired resignation. "Or you have a special talent for being everywhere I go," Zoe shot back, and for the first time in weeks, she saw a hint of a smile on his face, a sad, knowing smile, as if they were both tired of this war that no one had officially declared. "Why don't you quit?" he asked suddenly, turning to face her. "You know you're being watched from all sides. Rebecca has already spread that you were only hired because I like pretty faces. Maurice is waiting for you to slip up. Why do you continue?" Zoe felt anger rise like a tide, but kept her voice steady. "Because I'm good at what I do. Because my father died on a construction site, and I swore no worker would die from negligence if I could prevent it. And because, unlike you, I don't give up just because things get difficult." She turned to leave, but his hand grabbed her arm. Not forcefully, but with a gentleness that caught her off guard. When Zoe looked into his eyes, she saw something that scared her more than any professional criticism could. Vulnerability, fear, and something else, dangerous and hot like Louisville asphalt at noon. "You don't know me," Henry said quietly, so quietly she had to move closer to hear. "You don't know what I'm capable of when I want to protect someone." "Protect?" Zoe laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "You humiliate me every day at work. You let your family treat me like I'm nothing. Is that protection?" He let go of her arm, and for a second Zoe thought he was going to leave without answering. But then Henry did something completely unexpected. He took a paper from his pocket and handed it to her. It was an internal report, dated 15 years ago. Her father's name was there, along with an investigation that had never been concluded. Negligence, material diversion, bribery, all filed without resolution, and the signature at the bottom was Maurice Walsh. "Why are you showing me this?" Zoe whispered, feeling her hands tremble. "Because I need you to understand that this company has secrets I'm still discovering. And you, Zoe Franklin, just became the most dangerous person to my uncle." Henry held her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. "So yes, I treat you badly at work, because if anyone finds out I care about you, they'll use it against both of us. And I can't let them do to you what they did to your father." Zoe felt the world spin. She pulled her face back, slapping his hand away. "You don't have the right to decide how to protect me. I'm not a doll you put on a shelf when it gets dangerous." "I know," he said, and for the first time his voice broke, "but I also can't lose anyone else because of this damn company." They stood there, stopped in the middle of the bell of Louisville Overlook, with Louisville pulsing around them, indifferent to human drama. And Zoe realized, with devastating clarity, that this wasn't just attraction. It was something bigger, more complicated, the kind that destroys or transforms, and she had no idea which it would be. In the following days, things changed in subtle but noticeable ways. Henry remained demanding at work, but now Zoe understood the game. He pushed her because he knew she could take it. He criticized her because he wanted her to be impeccable, impossible to attack. And in the rare moments when they were alone, he allowed the mask to fall for a few seconds. A well-humored comment about some annoying client, a genuine smile when she solved a complicated problem, small gestures that were like breadcrumbs on a dark path. It was at a corporate dinner at the Brown Hotel that everything fell apart for good. Zoe had been invited as part of the team and spent 20 minutes choosing which of her 3 dresses would be least embarrassing at an event where the other women probably wore designer labels. She opted for black, because black always worked, even when the tag was still attached and you had to discreetly tear it off in the restaurant bathroom. Rebecca made a point of turning the evening into a spectacle of subtle cruelty. She arrived as if descending from a Parisian runway, all in gold and sparkles, with a neckline that defied the laws of physics and good sense. Zoe, in her department store black dress, felt like a nun at a carnival ball. "Zoe, darling." Rebecca dragged the chair next to her without being invited, exhaling expensive perfume and bad intentions. "What a practical dress. Is it vintage?" "It's from the spring-summer Target collection," Zoe replied with a sweet smile. "You must know it. It's near Neiman Marcus, isn't it?" Maya, who was on the other side of the table, coughed to disguise her laughter. Rebecca narrowed her eyes but kept smiling. "I love the sense of humor. So regional." Rebecca picked up a champagne flute and examined Zoe with that X-ray look that only truly malicious women master. "And your hair? Do you do it yourself or have a salon you trust? I can recommend mine. They work miracles with difficult textures." Zoe's hair, which she had carefully styled for 45 minutes, was naturally curly and absolutely didn't need miracles. But before she could respond, Henry appeared at the table, looking at Rebecca with an expression that could freeze hell. "Rebecca, I thought you had another commitment today," he said, and the tone was so cold even the air conditioning seemed inadequate. "I cancelled when I heard there would be new talents here," Rebecca purred, giving Zoe a wink that was simultaneously condescending and threatening. "After all, it's important to get to know the trainees well. You never know when they'll move up." Zoe felt Maya kick her foot under the table, as if saying, "Don't take the bait." But it was hard not to bite when the bait came wrapped in disgusting insinuations. The dinner continued in that climate of elegant Cold War. Rebecca made comments about the other women present, all perfectly groomed and clearly born into better cradles than Zoe's. She compared jewelry, talked about trips to Europe as if going to the corner store, asked about private schools Zoe didn't even know existed. Henry was sitting across the table, tense as a violin string about to snap, but maintaining his composure, until his eyes met Zoe's, and she saw a storm forming there. He was about to explode, she realized. And when Henry Walsh exploded, the destruction was proportional to the size of the wounded ego, until Rebecca decided to deliver the final blow. "Zoe, darling, your father worked in construction, didn't he? It must be comforting to see your daughter now on the inside of the office. I bet he'd be proud to know you managed to move up in life, one way or another." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the waiters stopped circulating. Zoe felt blood rush to her face, her hands gripping the linen napkin hard enough to tear it. But before she could respond, before she could gather the right words to destroy Rebecca with elegance, Henry slammed his glass on the table hard enough to crack the crystal. "Rebecca, if you open your mouth one more time to talk about Zoe's family, I swear the next project you'll be inaugurating is your divorce." His voice was pure ice, and the entire table froze. Conversation stopped. Silverware hung suspended in the air. "Her father died building the fortune you spend on bags and trinkets. He's worth more dead than you'll ever be worth alive. So I suggest you shut up before I decide to investigate where the extra money your husband's been moving comes from." Rebecca paled, a considerable feat for someone who clearly abused artificial tanning. She mumbled a pathetic excuse, something about a misunderstanding and misunderstood sense of humor, and practically fled the table, leaving a cloud of perfume and embarrassment. Eleanor, Henry's mother, looked at her son with a mixture of disapproval and surprise, and perhaps, just perhaps, a microscopic flash of pride. Zoe realized, with her heart beating out of rhythm, that Henry Walsh had just declared war on his own family, for her. The evening ended too early and too late. Zoe left the restaurant without goodbyes, with shaky legs and her heart pounding. She had made it to the sidewalk when she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Henry always walked as if the world were a stage, and he, the inevitable protagonist. She stopped, but didn't turn around. "Zoe, wait," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her freeze. It wasn't the boss's voice. It was the voice of the man from the park, the man who fed a grumpy dog and read poetry in secret. "Please." She turned slowly. Henry was disheveled in a way that seemed wrong on him. His tie loosened, his hair slightly messy, as if he had run his hands through it many times during dinner. "You shouldn't have done that," Zoe said, and hated the tremor in her own voice. "Now your family will hate me even more." "My family," he said, and laughed without humor, "always knew how to hate very well. You just became the most convenient target." He took a step forward, and Zoe instinctively stepped back. Henry stopped as if he'd been slapped. "I'm not going to hurt you." "You're already hurting me," she replied, and the words came out more honest than she intended. "Every time you pretend there's nothing between us, every time you treat me like I'm just another employee, every time you look at me like I'm simultaneously the best and worst thing that ever happened to you." Henry closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them there was something wild there, something that made Zoe's stomach turn with fear and desire. "Because you are," he said simply, "the best and the worst thing, and I don't know what to do with that." They stood there, stopped on a Louisville sidewalk, with the distant sound of the river and the nearby noise of cars. It was one of those moments that define everything, that separate before from after. Zoe knew that if she took one more step toward him, there would be no going back, and Henry knew that if he touched her, he would lose the last vestige of control he still maintained over his own life. It was Zoe who moved first. She closed the distance between them and held his face between her hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. "Then tell me the truth, once. No masks, no games. Do you feel something for me, or am I just a convenient distraction from the boredom of your perfect life?" Henry held her wrists, but didn't push her hands away. On the contrary, he pressed her palms harder against his own face, as if wanting to make sure she was real. "My life," he said, and his voice came out hoarse, destroyed, "was never perfect. My brother died because I wasn't attentive enough to my uncle's schemes. My family built an empire on lies and blood. And then you appeared, with your irritating idealism and your stupid courage, and made me remember that there are people who still believe that building means more than profit. So yes, Zoe, I feel something, and it's terrifying." Zoe didn't know who kissed whom first. Maybe it was simultaneous, an inevitable collision of two people who had been fighting gravity for too long. The kiss was anything but delicate. It was hunger and desperation, months of tension exploding in a single moment. Henry pulled her against him as if wanting to fuse them into one person, and Zoe clung to his shoulders as if drowning, and he was the only lifeline in the ocean. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Henry rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "This is a terrible idea," he murmured, but didn't let her go. "The worst," Zoe agreed, but her fingers were already tangled in his hair. "Your family will freak out. The office will turn into a gossip field. Maurice will use this against you, probably." Henry opened his eyes, and Zoe saw a determination there that didn't exist before. "But you know what? I've spent my whole life doing what was expected, building what my father ordered, marrying who my mother approved of, before realizing I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. For the first time, I want to do something completely selfish. I want you." Zoe felt her chest tighten with a mixture of joy and terror. "And I want you. But not like this, Henry. Not hidden. Not as a shameful secret. Your uncle killed my father, and you know it. If we're going to do this, it has to be the right way. With the truth coming out, with justice. I can't love you and pretend everything's okay." He stepped back, running his hands over his face. For a moment Zoe thought he was going to give up, retreat behind the walls he protected so well. But then Henry took her hand and squeezed it, as if sealing a pact. "Then let's do it the right way. I'll investigate every comma in the company files. I'll find out exactly what my uncle did, and I'll give you the justice your father deserves." "But Zoe..." He hesitated, and for the first time looked genuinely scared. If we start this, there's no going back. My family will destroy you if they can. Maurice will play dirty. Are you sure? Zoe thought about her father, coming home covered in cement, but always with a smile on his lips because he was building his daughter's future. She thought about her mother sewing late into the night to pay for college. She thought about all the times she was underestimated for where she came from. And then she looked at Henry, at that complicated and broken man who had finally decided to fight for something that wasn't just money and power. "I was born ready to fight," she said and smiled. "The question is, are you ready to love someone who won't bow to your family?" Henry laughed, and it was a laugh full of relief and admiration. "My dear, I am in love with someone who called me a driver on her first day of work. I think him past the point of no return." They went back together that night, fingers intertwined and the feeling that they had just jumped off a cliff without knowing where the bottom was. What neither of them knew was that Maurice Walsh was watching from a parked car across the street, with a cold smile on his lips and a plan forming in his corrupt mind. If Henry wanted to play hero, he was going to learn the hard way that no one betrayed the Walsh family without consequences. In the following weeks, Zoe and Henry tried to maintain discretion, but it was like trying to hide the sun with a sieve. They met in small restaurants far from the elite circuit, walked along the Louisville Loop at dusk, talked late into the night at her apartment that he found simultaneously cozy and tiny. Henry was discovering a world that had always existed parallel to his, but that he had never paid attention to. Food truck meals, live music in Nulu bars, the simple pleasure of eating barbecue straight from the wrapper without cloth napkins. And Zoe was discovering that behind the mask of coldness, there was a man who played piano when he was sad, who read T.S. Eliot in secret, who had a complicated relationship with his own talent because he always felt pressured to be perfect. One night, lying on her tiny couch, Henry confessed about the brother who had died. "He was better than me at everything, kinder, more human. When the accident happened, my father told me I had no choice now. I had to be perfect enough for two. And I've been trying ever since." Zoe kissed his forehead, feeling the weight of that confession. "You don't need to be perfect, Henry. You just need to be true." But happiness had an expiration date, and Maurice was counting the days. The bomb exploded on an ordinary Tuesday, the way the worst tragedies tend to happen, disguised as routine. Zoe was in a meeting presenting the new bridge access project when her phone started vibrating insistently. She ignored it the first time, the second, but the third time Henry looked at her with a strange expression and said quietly, "Answer it." On the other end of the line, her cousin's trembling voice, "Zoe, you need to see the news. Now." What followed was a succession of well-orchestrated horrors. A gossip site had published an entire article about Zoe Franklin, the poor trainee who was having an affair with billionaire Henry Walsh. There were photos of them walking hand in hand, dining, entering her building. And worse, there was a complete dossier about the accident that killed Zoe's father, insinuating that she had entered the company for revenge, that she was using Henry to destroy the family from within. The text was pure poison, disguised as journalism, painting Zoe as a dangerous opportunist and Henry as a lovesick fool being manipulated. But the coup de grace came at the end of the article. Documents that supposedly proved Zoe had altered technical reports on an ongoing project, putting lives at risk. The documents were fake, of course, but they were so well forged they looked real, and the digital signature was hers. Zoe felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Around the table, colleagues looked at her with a mixture of shock and judgment. Henry was pale, reading the article on his phone with an expression of contained fury. When he looked up, Zoe saw hesitation there, just a second of doubt, but it was enough to break something inside her. He didn't completely trust her. Even after everything, part of him still wondered if she could be capable of that. "Everyone out. Now," Henry ordered, and his voice had that icy tone everyone knew and feared. The room emptied in seconds. When they were alone, he approached slowly, as if she were a bomb about to explode. "Zoe, Look at me. You didn't do this." It wasn't a question, but it also wasn't a complete statement. "Do you need to hear it from me?" Zoe asked, and her voice came out firmer than she felt. "You know who I am. You know I would never put lives at risk. If you have a single doubt about that, then we're already over before we even started." "I don't have doubts about you," Henry said, but his eyes said otherwise. They said he wanted to believe, but years of betrayals and lies in the corporate world had taught him never to trust blindly. "I have doubts about the timing, about how my uncle got access to internal files, about whether I'm really who I say I am." Zoe finished the sentence, and something inside her broke definitively. "It's okay, Henry. I understand. You grew up in a world where everyone wants something from you, but I'm not everyone. And if you can't see that, then maybe your family is right. Maybe we really are from incompatible worlds." She grabbed her bag and left the room without looking back, even when she heard Henry calling her name. Zoe crossed the office under curious and judgmental stares, entered the elevator, and only when the doors closed allowed the tears to fall. She wasn't naive. She knew this was going to happen sooner or later. The difference between dream and reality is that dreams don't have Maurice Walshes to destroy them. What Zoe didn't see was Henry, alone in the conference room, punching the wall hard enough to crack the plaster and his own fingers. He had hesitated. For one damn second he had looked at her and wondered if he really knew that woman. And now she was gone, and he wasn't sure if he could bring her back. The following days were a slow-motion nightmare. Zoe was suspended while an internal investigation was conducted. Her photo was on every gossip site, always with those cruel headlines that turned love into scandal. "Cinderella scammer, poor trainee seduces billionaire" was one of the most creative. "From Bowling Green to the heart and wallet of the tycoon" was another particularly painful one. Her mother called crying from the countryside, alternating between maternal concern and phrases like, "I warned you Louisville was big city people territory." Her cousin tried to cheer her up with brownies and bad movie sessions, but Zoe saw the worry in her eyes. No one fought the Walshes and came out unscathed. "You should sue those sites for defamation," her cousin suggested, shoving a third spoonful of ice cream straight from the container into Zoe's mouth. "With what money, Lisa? Am I going to sell my 3 dresses and my diploma?" Zoe laughed humorlessly, accepting the ice cream spoon like bitter medicine. "People like the Walshes have lawyers who cost more per hour than I make per month. They can destroy me legally without even blinking." "That Henry is a coward," Lisa declared, taking more ice cream angrily. "Defending you in front of the witch sister-in-law, but wavering when it counts. Men are useless." "Is not a coward," Zoe murmured, and hated how her voice still defended him. "He's just human, with all the flaws that come in the package." "Human and idiot aren't mutually exclusive," Lisa pointed out wisely. "You can be both at the same time. In fact, most men are." Meanwhile, across town, Henry dove into the company files with an obsession that worried even Winston, who started sleeping under the office desk just to make sure his owner ate something. "You look like a zombie," his secretary commented on Thursday, placing another cup of coffee on the already cluttered desk. A well-dressed zombie, but still a zombie. Henry didn't even respond, just kept reading spreadsheets with bloodshot eyes from exhaustion. He knew Maurice was behind everything, but proof was another story. His uncle was slippery, always letting other people sign the compromising documents, until Henry found something he didn't expect. An old payment from 15 years ago to a shell company. The amount corresponded exactly to what was missing from the budget of the project where Zoe's father had died. And the bank account that received the money? It was in the name of an offshore that, after much digging, led straight to Maurice. He had the proof. Finally, he could destroy his uncle and clear Zoe's name. But when he called her, Zoe didn't answer. He tried a second time, a third, a 10th. Nothing. He went to her apartment and found her cousin, who looked at him with a mixture of pity and anger. She went back to Bowling Green yesterday. She said Louisville had become too small for the 2 shames she carried, hers and your hesitation. Henry felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "I didn't hesitate, You hesitated," Lisa cut him off, merciless. She was short, but had the intimidating presence of someone who grew up defending cousins in schoolyard fights. For 1 second, you looked at her and didn't see the woman you love. You saw a possible threat. And for someone like Zoe, who spent her whole life being judged for where she comes from, that second was a lifetime of contempt repeated. So congratulations, Henry Walsh. You managed to do what your family always wanted, prove she wasn't good enough for you. "That's not what happened," Henry began. But Lisa raised her hand, silencing him with a look that had probably made many men reconsider their life choices. "You know what's funniest? She still defends you, still thinks you're just human with flaws. I, personally, think you're a privileged idiot who had everything in life except the decency to trust someone who never gave you reason to doubt." Lisa crossed her arms, planted in the doorway like a furious guardian. "But hey, at least you have your empire, right? Must keep you warm at night." "I love her," Henry said, and his voice came out broken in a way that surprised both of them. "I know I screwed up. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to try to fix this." Lisa studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she sighed. "You have documents proving she's innocent." Henry raised the folder he was carrying. "I do. And I have proof that will destroy my uncle and all the rot he built in the company." "Good. Take it to her. But I'm going to warn you something, rich boy. If you show up there with that folder and that magazine cover face, you're going to get the door slammed in your face. Zoe doesn't want to be saved. She wants to be respected. So if you really love her, you're going to have to prove it in a way that doesn't involve money, power, or any of those things you've always used to solve problems." Lisa opened the door a little more, as if allowing his passage through a portal. "And another thing, her grandmother is a saint, but she's also from Kentucky and has a very sharp kitchen knife. Just warning you." Henry almost smiled. "Almost. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If you hurt my cousin again, I'll go to your penthouse myself and throw your fat dog out the window, and then throw you." She slammed the door in his face, and Henry stood there in the hallway, holding the documents that could save everything, but knowing it might be too late. He had learned too late that love isn't built with proof and evidence. It's built with blind trust, the kind he had never been capable of giving. And now Zoe was gone, taking with her the only decent version of himself he had managed to find. That night, Henry did something he hadn't done since his brother's death. He sat at the penthouse piano and played. He played Chopin, he played Gershwin, he played everything he could remember while Louisville sparkled below, indifferent to the personal tragedy of a man who had everything and at the same time nothing. Winston lay at his feet, and Henry had the distinct feeling that even the dog was judging him. Rightly so. But in Bowling Green, Zoe was in her grandmother's backyard, helping fix the roof that had started leaking. It was the same work her father used to do, using the same tools he had left behind. She hammered the shingles with a force that came from somewhere deep and painful, trying to channel anger and sadness into something productive. Grandmother Margaret watched from the porch, with that silent wisdom of someone who had seen many storms pass. She was peeling potatoes for lunch, but Zoe knew that silence was temporary. Her grandmother had strong opinions about everything, especially about men who hurt granddaughters. "That man is going to come after you," her grandmother finally said, without preamble, throwing a potato peel with surgical precision into the trash bucket. "He won't," Zoe replied, hammering another shingle harder than necessary. The echo reverberated through the yard. "Men like him don't chase. They wait for us to come crawling back. Then he's not the man you described to me on the phone." Her grandmother stood up, put down the knife, and picked up one of Zoe's father's tape measures. For 72 years old, Margaret had impressive agility. She climbed the ladder next to her granddaughter as if climbing to get a cup from the cupboard. "The man you described was someone who was learning to be human again. And humans make mistakes, granddaughter. The question is whether hell have the courage to fix them." Zoe stopped hammering and looked at her grandmother. "Grandma, are you on his side?" I'm on the side of common sense, Margaret replied, measuring a shingle with the tape measure as if she were a construction expert. And maybe she was, after 50 years married to a builder. And common sense says a man who plays piano when he's sad, who has a grumpy dog, and who defends his granddaughter from mean people in the middle of a fancy dinner can't be completely bad. He doubted me. For 1 second, you said. 1 second, Zoe. I doubted your grandfather for 3 months when he said he was going to build this house with his own hands. Thought it was drunk talk. And look, she tapped the shingle. 50 years later, it's still standing. People aren't perfect. They're just people. Sometimes idiots, but people. Zoe felt tears threaten again. But it hurt, Grandma. It hurt like all the years of effort were worth nothing. Like I was still just the poor country girl who doesn't deserve to be in beautiful places. Margaret put down the tape measure and pulled her granddaughter into a tight hug, balancing on the ladder in a way that defied the laws of physics and prudence. You always deserve to be in beautiful places, sweetheart. The problem is, the world takes time to realize. But you know what I learned? Pain isn't an excuse not to give a chance. It's a reason to give a chance more carefully, that's all. They stayed there, hugging on the roof, Zoe trying not to cry and her grandmother humming softly an old song her grandfather used to sing. Zoe didn't respond, but something in her chest softened a little. Just a little. Because even with all the love in the world, there were wounds that took time to heal, and Henry's hesitation had cut too deep. Henry Walsh wasn't a man for grand romantic gestures, not until he met Zoe. But now, standing in the middle of the boardroom with the documents proving Maurice's guilt in one hand and his resignation letter in the other, he realized that grand gestures were sometimes the only language fate understood. He called an emergency board meeting, summoned the press, and, in a move that would make his father turn in his grave, exposed every comma of the corruption that had been corroding the company for decades. Maurice was removed under police custody, screaming threats and denying everything, but the numbers didn't lie. Zoe's father had been just one of many victims of a scheme that diverted millions while cutting corners on safety. Eleanor Walsh watched her son destroy his own empire with an expression Henry couldn't decipher. When the room emptied, and only the two of them remained, she stood slowly, adjusted her expensive purse and said, "You're more like your brother than I imagined." He also put principles above convenience. She paused, and for the first time in years, Henry saw something like genuine emotion on his mother's face. "I was married for interest, Henry. I learned to love your father, but the choice was never mine. So even if I don't approve of your methods, I understand why you're doing this. I just hope she's worth it." "She is," Henry said without hesitation. "She's worth everything." His mother nodded and left, leaving Henry alone with the consequences of his own choices. He had lost the presidency, but in the process had recovered something much more valuable, his own humanity. Now, all that was left was the hardest part, convincing Zoe he deserved a second chance. The trip to Bowling Green was the longest of Henry's life. He drove with Winston in the passenger seat, mentally rehearsing the speech he would make. Winston, in turn, snored loudly and occasionally drooled on the Italian leather upholstery, completely indifferent to his owner's existential crisis. "Do you think she'll forgive me?" Henry asked the dog at one point. Winston opened one eye, stared at him with that judgmental expression only bulldogs can make, and went back to sleep. "Thanks for the support," Henry muttered. When he finally arrived at Zoe's grandmother's house, all the prepared words evaporated. The house was small, painted a faded yellow, with a dirt yard and flowers in repurposed paint cans. It was the kind of place Henry had never set foot in, the kind of simplicity he had always looked at from afar, from inside cars with tinted windows. Zoe was in the yard, in an old band t-shirt he didn't recognize and faded shorts, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that defied any attempt at elegance. She was hammering shingles with almost violent determination, sweat running down her neck. She was beautiful in a way no woman in an evening gown he'd ever known had been, beautiful in a real, sweaty, human way, beautiful in a way that made his heart ache. Henry got out of the car trying to look confident and probably looking just ridiculous with his dress pants and leather shoes in a dirt yard. Winston, on the other hand, got out of the car like he owned the place and ran straight to Zoe, jumping on her with an enthusiasm the dog reserved only for very special people and open food bowls. Zoe laughed despite herself, crouching to scratch the bulldog's ears. "Hi, Winston. At least you're loyal to me, right? He's technically my dog," Henry said, and Zoe finally looked up. Her look could freeze the Kentucky sun. "What are you doing here?" "Fixing what I broke," Henry replied simply and pointed to the roof. "Can I come up?" Zoe hesitated, looking at him as if weighing whether it was worth it or if it would be easier just to throw a shingle at his head. Finally she nodded. "You can, but if you fall and break something, Grandma has health insurance and won't pay for your private hospital." Henry climbed the ladder with an awkwardness that would have been funny in other circumstances. He was used to riding private elevators in penthouses, not old wooden ladders that creaked with each step as if planning his death. When he reached her side on the roof, he took the hammer from her hands and looked at the shingle like it was an Egyptian hieroglyph. Zoe watched him, incredulous. "Do you know what you're doing?" "Absolutely not," he admitted, and tried to nail the shingle. He missed the nail by a good 5 centimeters, hitting the wood at an angle that defied geometry. "But I learn fast. And Zoe, I need you to listen to me, just 5 minutes. If after that you want me to leave, I'll go, I promise." 5 minutes, Zoe agreed, taking the hammer back before he destroyed the entire roof. "But you're going to have to work while you talk. If you came here to make a movie scene, forget it." Henry smiled crookedly and picked up another shingle. This time, with Zoe guiding his hand, he got it right, more or less. I hesitated. "You're right. For 1 second when I saw those documents, my first reaction wasn't to defend you, it was to protect myself, and that was unforgivable." He tried to nail another nail, missed again, and Zoe rolled her eyes. "You're terrible at this." "I'm terrible at many things," he admitted. "Trust, vulnerability, nailing shingles, but I want to be better. I want you to know that that second of hesitation was followed by weeks of absolute certainty. I destroyed my uncle, resigned from the presidency, exposed all the rot in the company because you were right." Zoe stopped working and stared at him. "You resigned? From the empire? From what you spent your life building? You can't build anything solid on lies. You taught me that." Henry put down the hammer, clearly giving up any pretense of being useful there. "And I want to build something solid with you, Zoe. No matter how many times I have to try hammering shingles or prove I've changed, even if I'm terribly incompetent with tools." Zoe felt tears threaten, but held them back hard. "It's not about you changing, Henry. It's about you trusting. And trust isn't built in weeks. It takes time." "Then give me that time," he asked, and there was something so naked, so vulnerable in that request that Zoe felt her heart tighten. "I'm not asking you to come back to Louisville with me now. I'm not asking you to pretend everything's okay. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that when I look at you, I don't see where you came from or who your family was. I see the woman who made me want to be better." At that moment, Grandmother Margaret appeared at the kitchen window with a pitcher of lemonade and an evaluating look. "How long are you two going to stay up there? Lunch is almost ready and I don't put food on roofs." Zoe and Henry looked at her grandmother, then at each other, and then both started laughing. It was a nervous, relieved laugh, the kind that happens when tension finally breaks. "My grandmother says you were going to come," Zoe finally said, and a hint of a smile played on her lips. "She also said if you didn't know how to fix a roof, you were useless." Henry looked at the completely crooked shingle he had just nailed and laughed. "Then I'm screwed." "Completely," Zoe agreed. And then, unable to hold back anymore, she also laughed. "But we can work on that. Teaching a billionaire to hammer could be an interesting project." She approached and took the hammer from his hand. "Let me teach you. First, you hold it like this. Second, you don't try to kill the shingle, just fix it. And third," she looked into his eyes, and there was something serious there now. "You're going to have to win over my grandmother, because if she doesn't approve, there's no discussion." "Challenge accepted," Henry said, and for the first time in weeks felt something like hope. In the months that followed, Henry Walsh became a familiar figure in Bowling Green. He traveled every week, sometimes staying at the town's simple hotel, other times daring to accept Grandmother Margaret's invitation to sleep in the guest room that smelled of mothballs and had a pink crocheted bedspread with embroidered ferns. The first time he slept there, Henry sent Zoe a photo of the room, decorated with porcelain miniatures and an illuminated crucifix that blinked at night. "I think your grandmother is trying to convert me or scare me. Haven't decided which yet," he wrote. "Probably both," Zoe replied. "She does that with all boyfriends. My ex lasted 3 days before running away, complaining that the glowing Virgin Mary watched him while he slept. He learned to fix gutters, always under the rigorous supervision of Grandmother Margaret, who had firm opinions about the right way to hold pliers. He learned to make coffee in a clay pot, burning the first 2 attempts until he discovered that low heat really meant low heat. He learned to talk to neighbors without that air of superiority he used to have, though he still occasionally stumbled over phrases like, "Oh, interesting, I never thought of reusing plastic bottles that way," said with genuine amazement that made everyone laugh at him fondly. The neighbors, by the way, loved the soap opera. Miss Donna next door commented to Grandmother Margaret, "That rich boy of Zoe's is handsome, but he's kind of clumsy, isn't he? Yesterday I saw him trying to fix the fence, and the wire ended up more crooked than an old umbrella handle. But his heart's in the right place," Margaret defended. "And look, Donna, a man who's not afraid to get his hands dirty is a real man, regardless of his bank account size." And slowly, brick by brick, crooked hammer by crooked hammer, he and Zoe rebuilt what had been broken, this time with more honest, deeper foundations. Zoe, in turn, sued the construction company for moral damages and won. The money went directly to a fund she created for families of workplace accident victims. Henry, now free from the presidency and working as an independent consultant, offered to be a partner in a new venture, Franklin and Walsh Sustainable Engineering, a small company focused on projects that prioritize safety and social responsibility over profit. It was the opposite of everything his family represented, and it was exactly what he needed. Epilogue. 2 years later, the inauguration of Franklin and Walsh's first project took place on a clear day, with Louisville shining as only it knows how. It was a low-income housing complex in the Portland neighborhood, built with sustainable technology and impeccable safety. Zoe was wearing a hard hat and vest, talking to future residents, when she felt Henry's arms around her waist. "Congratulations, partner," he murmured in her ear. "Your father would be proud. And look, I managed not to nail any crooked shingles this time." Zoe turned in his arms, laughing. "You didn't nail any shingles at all, Henry. You were coordinating the bureaucratic part, which is where you're actually useful." "Hey, I've gotten much better with tools," he protested. "Last week I fixed the office chair by myself. You tightened a loose screw." "It counts," he insisted, and she laughed even more. Zoe turned completely in his arms, and there were tears in her eyes, but they were good tears. "Our father would be proud," she corrected, "because you're family now, Henry Walsh, for better and for worse." "I vote for better," he said, and kissed her right there, in the middle of the construction site, with the workers applauding and whistling. Though worse has its fun moments, like that time I tried to make bourbon chicken and almost set your kitchen on fire. Or that time you confused salt with sugar in the coffee and served it to the investors, Zoe added, still laughing. In my defense, the containers looked identical. Winston barked indignantly at their feet, demanding attention and probably judging the public kiss. Next to the bulldog, a caramel-colored mutt with droopy ears they had rescued from a construction site stretched in the sun. Concrete, as they had named him, was the company's unofficial mascot and had the annoying habit of stealing engineers' hard hats and burying them at construction sites. The previous week, they had spent 2 hours looking for the foreman's hard hat, only to discover that Concrete had created a secret PPE cemetery behind the storage shed. Eleanor Walsh appeared at the inauguration, to everyone's surprise, wearing an elegant but discreet outfit, without the ostentatious jewelry of before. She greeted Zoe with courtesy that, although still touched by coldness, hid a reluctant and genuine respect. "You really managed to transform my son into a decent person," she said, and there was something like humor in her voice. "I don't know whether to thank you or blame you for ending the political ambitions I had for him. Last week he called me excited because he learned to change a tire by himself." "A tire, Zoe. He's 35 years old. With all due respect, Mrs. Eleanor," Zoe replied with a sweet smile, "I think Henry was always decent. He just needed permission to be. And about the tire, I don't know if he told you, but it took 3 hours and he had to call the mechanic anyway. But the effort was beautiful to see." Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, not that polite laugh from social events. "You're right. And I spent so much time building walls that I forgot to build bridges." She looked at the housing complex, at the workers working with adequate safety equipment, at her son talking animatedly with a construction foreman about sustainable building techniques. Henry was genuinely excited, gesturing and explaining something about foundations, completely different from the cold businessman she had raised. "My husband would say this is unproductive sentimentalism. But you know what? Maybe it's exactly the kind of production the world needs. And," she hesitated, "something rare for Eleanor Walsh. You taught me that sometimes the best things in life are the ones we didn't plan." The party extended into the evening, with live music, food truck barbecue, hot browns, and lots of cold beer. Henry danced to country music for the first time in his life, stepping on Zoe's feet with impressive regularity and laughing at himself with an ease that would have been impossible years ago. "You're terrible at this," Zoe said, laughing as he tried to keep up with the rhythm. "I'm terrible at many things," he agreed, spinning her completely wrong, "but improving. At least today I only stepped on your foot 5 times. Last week it was 12. Aunt Beatrice, who had become an unexpected accomplice of the couple and unofficial company advisor, made a toast with her beer glass. "To those who build bridges, not walls. To those who choose love over profit. And to those who prove that sometimes the best foundations are made of courage, trust, and a lot of patience, to teach a billionaire to hold a hammer correctly." Everyone laughed and toasted. When the party finally ended and they returned to the apartment in Louisville, now larger and shared by 2, but still with touches of simplicity that Zoe insisted on maintaining. "No, Henry, we don't need a crystal chandelier in the living room. The IKEA lamp works perfectly fine." Zoe lay on the couch with her head in Henry's lap. Churchill and Concrete slept curled up together at their feet, the bulldog snoring loudly and the mutt using the other's belly as a pillow. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Giving up everything?" Henry ran his fingers through her hair, thoughtful. "I gave up things that were never really mine. Titles, power, a presidency that was always more a prison than an achievement. But I gained this." He pointed to the modest living room, which mixed Zoe's used bookshelf with the rare first editions he couldn't let go of, to the 2 sleeping dogs, to Zoe. "I gained a life that has meaning. I gained you correcting me when I used too many technical terms with clients. I gained your scoldings when I forget not everyone had French lessons in childhood. I gained your laughter when I ruined dinner for the 11th time. So no, I don't regret it one bit." 11th, Zoe corrected, smiling. "You forgot last week's chicken pot pie that tasted like soap because you confused the dish soap container with the olive oil. In my defense, they're both yellow liquids. Henry, one was labeled lemon dish soap in giant letters. Details, he murmured, but was smiling. The important thing is, I tried." Zoe stood up and kissed him slowly, with the patience of someone who knows they have all the time in the world. "You know what's funniest?" she said when they separated. "The day we met, I thought you were the worst thing that could have happened to me. An arrogant, rich, and impossible boss who humiliated me in the parking lot. And now?" Henry asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it anyway. "Now I know you were the best thing I didn't know I was looking for. A man who learns to nail crooked shingles just to make me smile. who sleeps in rooms with crocheted bedspreads and glowing Virgin Marys, who dances country music stepping on my feet and thinks he's killing it, who gave up an empire to build something real with me. When you put it that way, I sound almost heroic." Henry joked. "You are heroic," Zoe said. "Serious now, in your own clumsy and unlikely way, and I love you exactly for that." Concrete chose that moment to wake up and steal Henry's slipper, running through the room with it in his mouth, while Winston opened one eye, judged the situation, and went back to sleep. "Your dog is destroying my slipper," Henry commented, without moving to retrieve it. "Our dog," Zoe corrected. "And that's revenge for you eating his last brownie yesterday. Dogs don't eat brownies. Try explaining that to Concrete. Has a Kentucky mutt, Henry. He eats everything and has strong opinions about canine social justice." Henry laughed and pulled Zoe closer. "How did I live 33 years without all this craziness?" "I don't know," Zoe replied, settling into his embrace. "But now you're stuck with me, with my two crazy dogs, my grandmother who scolds you when you hold the tool wrong, and my attempts to civilize you." "Best prison ever," he murmured against her hair. Outside, Louisville continued its eternal dance between river and concrete, between luxury and simplicity, between what was and what could be. And somewhere between these two realities, Henry and Zoe had built something that no Walsh or Maurice in the world could destroy. A love that didn't need perfect foundations, just honest ones. A love made of crooked shingles, stolen brownies, incorrectly wielded hammers, and the absolute certainty that sometimes the best thing that happens in life is when you stop planning and let the Kentucky chaos take you. And sometimes that was more than enough. It was everything. So did you enjoy this story? If the answer is yes, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a big like, and hit that notification bell. This way, you'll be helping me continue bringing emotional stories like this one, and other people just like you will be able to receive good stories like this. Your participation makes all the difference. Until the next story, and may your day be as beautiful as a Louisville sunset.